Bruce Hasler is our Chief Technology Officer here at RevRoad. He does amazing work along with his team, and he's got a presentation that he is going to be sharing with us called Using Systems to Scale at Breakneck Speed. So let's give it up for Bruce. Welcome him up to the stage.
Cool. Thanks, Jason. All right. How's everybody doing today? Yes. Okay, cool. So like Jason said, I'm the CTO here at RevRoad, one of the co-founders as well. So super fun to work with startups. Today I want to share 3 stories about scaling. If you remember some of my previous presentations, one of the words of caution is that scale doesn't happen usually immediately. But today I want to talk about how you scale, some examples of scaling, and a few different types of scaling. So to get started, who can tell me what this picture is? Not Tyler. Okay, it's the Safari icon. Why is it weird on one side? I heard old screen. That's true. That's a good term. Okay, pixelated. Okay, so let's go with that. So back when Apple released the iPhone 10, they came up with this thing that they coined Retina display. Do you guys remember this? And Retina display is basically when you've got your phone so far away you can't see the pixels, right? So it's basically higher density pixels, but they named it something cool because it's Apple. Okay, so what I want to share first is how Retina display almost broke our business. So this is a business that I worked in about 5 years ago, and we were I don't know, medium-sized, startup-ish type company, and we had developed this new technology. We had developed a district app, and it was really cool. And one of the unique value props is that each district could get their own app in the App Store. It could have its own branding, and you could have whatever you wanted to in it, which was super awesome. And at the time, we were doing these quarterly releases, and we had about 100 apps in the App Store. So that's a lot of apps, right? How many of you have ever submitted an app to the App Store? So a lot of people. How is that process? Shari? It is super, I've never heard anyone say, I love submitting apps to the App Store. Anyway, super painful. At the time, it took us, and we actually had a fairly good process down, and this is to do one app for both stores, iOS and Android. We could do it in about 4 hours. And I wish Jacob Hutchings was here. He actually worked with me at this company on this project. And so let's go back to the whole Retina thing. So back in 2010, which is when Apple released this, like I said, we had 100 apps in the App Store. It took us 4 hours per app. Doing the quick math, that's what? It's like 400 hours, okay? So that's the equivalent of like 10 man weeks. So just think about that for a second. So we had a small team of, I think it was like 4 or 5 people that actually crunched on this for a couple of 3 weeks every quarter when we did this. So Apple comes out, they're like, hey, we have cool new technology, but all you Apple developers, you've got to submit all new screenshots, new icons, and the whole bit. And this has actually happened a few times since then. But at the time, we're just like, because it was going to literally double like the amount of time that it took. And so we went back to our little conference room, and we're like, we've got to figure out what to do. The solution that we came up with, we called it Project App Builder because it's always fun to come up with like some code name for what you do, right? And the goal was to automate as much of that process as possible. So we're like, we'll get some smart engineers to go work on this. We'll go automate it. This is back in the early days of the App Store, right? So like 2010 is early days. And so we put a bunch of smart people on it. And because of that, we were able to get each app down to about 10 minutes per app. There were still some things we had to do manually. This doesn't include when we get rejected and have to go back and forth with Apple. This was before Google actually had real people looking at them, so that didn't really matter. But by the time I left in 2017, we had 2,000 apps in the App Store, which is just like, that's bonkers. There's no way that we would have been able to scale to that many apps without having some type of process like this. So here's an example of something that I call an enabling technology. So this isn't something that we sold, right? This wasn't technology, this wasn't our core business that we sold, but it helped us to be able to scale our core business, which was apps, okay? Does that make sense? Okay, So let's go on to story number 2. Who remembers this date? Okay, what was this date? Okay, this was the day that the federal government mandated if you weren't, what was it, essential or something like that? If you weren't an essential business, like basically just send everybody home. So I think everybody, even if you don't remember the date, you remember like this happening, right? So a couple of days, and I didn't realize how quickly this happened. A couple days later, the government actually signed into law the CARES Act. So have you ever seen the government do anything this quick in your life? So 2 days later, CARES Act was signed into law. I don't want to debate whether that was a good thing or not, but it happened very quickly. There was a pile of money, a ton of money that was put into this, and it was all for COVID relief. The piece of COVID that I want to talk about today is the part that affects small businesses, because most of us in here kind of can relate to that. And so one piece that everybody knows about is the Paycheck Protection Program, which I can't say very fast. So PPP, as it's more commonly known. Initially, there was $350 billion assigned to it. It ballooned up to $669 billion at the end. And if you think about it, as the government's trying to figure out how do I get money into the hands of small businesses, they needed a way to scale that, right? So what did the government do? Who's really good at getting money to small businesses? Banks, like financial institutions. That's what they do, right? The problem is banks aren't very good at just writing checks to businesses. Like that was not a thing. But what was a thing is they knew how to give loans. Like that's what they did. And so the government chose that vehicle to be able to distribute that money, okay? So loans via banks. So that's the way that program scaled. And I think most of us remember that was kind of a nightmare because everybody was scrambling for the money. Everybody built these systems that kind of almost immediately crashed. But in the end, it kind of worked, right? We're able to get a bunch of money out to businesses, okay? Here's a lesser known thing. So a little bit after that, the government added on to the CARES Act. This actually happened a lot, but they added a tax law for employee retention credit, or more commonly known as ERC. And I don't know exactly how much money was allocated, but an employer could get up to $26,000 per W-2 employee, which is actually a lot of money, in the form of a tax credit, okay? And so for those of you that run small businesses or that have done it in the past, what is the main way that you like file your tax? Like how do you do your tax stuff? Okay, there's a couple ways. You could do it yourself. Shari said CPA, which is what most people do. Most CPAs are fairly good at filing taxes, right? They're really good. They're happy to take your money and help you do that. And you know, if you're a super small business and you're savvy, you might use TurboTax to do that or something like that. TurboTax and the majority of the CPAs have no idea what to do with ERC, especially at the beginning. This is some of the most vague tax law that's been enacted, the ERC was. And so at the very beginning, there wasn't a lot of this money that was claimed. Most people didn't even know it existed. And so I want to share with you an example of a company that was able to capitalize on that, not only from letting people know about it, but able to scale it. So this is a company that's actually part of the RevU portfolio called ERC Specialist. And they figured out how to scale this specific program. So one of the things that they did, and just to back up a little bit, if you go search for ERC today, Google will show you all kinds of people now that are willing to help you file for that credit. The majority of them are CPAs, like almost all of them are. And that process looks a little something like this. Hey, we can help you get up to $26,000 per employee. How do we do that? Fill out this info request and we'll get back to you. And then a human will go call you, and then a human will help you go file basically an amendment to your tax return. So that's the way that the process has worked for like 99.9% of people. ERC is like, we need to be able to do better than that because that does not scale very well. In order to scale that, I have to hire tons and tons and tons of CPAs, right? And I've got to have people on the phone, and I've got to have salespeople and stuff like that in order to connect those two. So what they did was they built something that scaled. They created an online application so that I could go fill out all my stuff online. I could tell if I qualified or not. I could go upload the appropriate documentation for it. Automated all the processes. They had an affiliate sales channel so they could scale that. And I'm going to skip to this. As a result of that, they've been able to process, and this number's old, so it's probably more than that now, $2.7 billion in credits. So that's a ton of money. There are like 0 CPA firms that have been able to do this. Like, probably you couldn't find 1,000 firms together that could do this. So that's really impressive. So I'm going to back up. I'm going to ask, how did they do that? So how did they do that? And I've worked really closely with the people in the company that created this. As they were looking at building this, a lot of startups would say, hey, I know how to do this. I'll go hire a bunch of developers, and we'll go design this thing, and we'll take 6 months or a year to build it, and then we'll go roll it out, yada, 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 right? The window for this money is fairly small. So if you think like a traditional startup, it doesn't work. You don't have time to go take a year to go build a product, because then you've missed the boat. There's no more money left. So build versus buy wasn't an option. So they're like, hey, how do we take things that exist in real life? How do we get them to people so that we can start collecting on this? So they leveraged existing products. Every piece of this they automated and they integrated. And then they had specific teams assigned to each piece of that journey. And then actively, whenever they would find a bottleneck, they would go, like I talked about this app submission thing, they had like 30 of those things. They would go find the bottleneck, and then they would go kill it, okay? So that's how they were able to do that and scale to this huge number. So this is a story where, like, literally this system helped that business scale, and it was their business. And so they had a whole bunch of, enabling technology, but they also had technology that was like their product. Okay, last. I want to talk about FedRAMP, because compliance documents are super fun. Did anybody notice this thing back here? Okay, Tyler did. So this is a FedRAMP document. I can barely pick it up. Can you imagine, first of all, generating, so this is 800 plus pages. Can you imagine generating that? So that would be a nightmare. After you generate it, you actually have to maintain this thing. It has to get certified every year. Usually companies will have like groups of 15 or 30 people that manage this process. So super time intensive. And in this document, there's probably, groups of paragraphs or sentences that are in there like 20 or 30 times. So massive duplication in there too. The next thing I want to talk about is a company that's been able to build a product to help scale the efficiency of the guys that build this thing, okay? So this is Paramify. So I've got Kenny and Tyler that's in the audience here. Paramify, woohoo. So Paramify has made it possible to scale like a team of, and these are just sample numbers. Like, let's say that I've got a team of 4. They could do what a team of, I could have a few people that could do something like this. And in fact, they've already sold this, and they've actually generated documents just like this for real companies, mainly with just like Kenny himself, which is like one guy. But we'll say he's equal to 4 because he's super awesome. And so how did they do that? As they thought about Paramify, one, there's a lot of standards that go into building these compliance products. And so what they did is they mapped what they did in their product to these standards. And then they made it possible for, hey, if I have this one standard and this solution to this standard, and it answers 30 questions, let's just go ahead and have it answer those 30 questions so that I don't have to do that over and over again. And I'm super oversimplifying this, but, and then they built this really cool technology that automatically generates this thing right here. Would not recommend printing these out because it kills lots and lots of trees. And then they also have the capability of all of these different things. Usually in a company, there are different people responsible for these different pieces. So it makes it really easy to divvy out that work so that they can get that done. And so that's how they were able to do that. And so just kind of in closing, it's super important to think a little bit outside of the box of, what are my scaling problems? A lot of people just think about scale, about, well, how do I hire more people faster, right? How do I sell more? But you know, there's lots of areas that you can scale your business. So, questions? Everyone knows how to do all of the scaling things. Excellent. Cool. All right. Well, I'll go ahead and end early so that we can turn the time over to our feature founders. So thanks, guys.